The gunshot that killed Thomas Harper echoed through the Silver Creek mine on a Tuesday morning in June 1882. And his widow Helena would spend the next 3 months fighting a battle she never expected to wage in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Helena stood in the cramped office of mine owner Victor Garrison, her black mourning dress already dusty from the walk through town. Her hands trembled as she clutched the compensation papers Thomas had shown her just 2 weeks before his death, the ones that promised his family would be taken care of if anything happened in the dangerous tunnels beneath the earth. She was 24 years old, and the weight of sudden widowhood pressed against her chest like a physical thing. "Mrs. Harper, I understand your position, but the policy is quite clear." Garrison sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He was a portly man with silver hair and cold eyes that never quite met hers. Compensation is paid to the miner himself in cases of injury or to his male heirs in cases of death. You have no sons, no brothers-in-law. Therefore, there is no one eligible to receive payment. Helena's voice came out stronger than she felt. "That makes no sense at all. Thomas worked in your mine for 6 years. He paid into the insurance fund every single month. That money was meant to support his family, and I am his family. The contracts specify male recipients only. Women don't receive compensation. It's simply not done, Mrs. Harper. I didn't write the rules. I merely enforce them." Garrison opened a drawer and pulled out a ledger, dismissing her with the gesture. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a great deal of work to attend to. My husband died because your foreman rushed the blasting schedule. Everyone in town knows those charges weren't set properly. Thomas and 2 other men are dead because of negligence, and you sit there telling me that his life's work, his sacrifice, amounts to nothing for his wife." Helena's voice rose, anger cutting through her grief. Garrison's expression hardened. "I suggest you watch your accusations, Mrs. Harper. Mining is dangerous work. Your husband knew the risks when he signed on. Good day." Helena left the office with her cheeks burning and her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She would not cry in front of that man. She would not give him the satisfaction. The August heat beat down on Main Street as she walked past the general store, the saloon, the boarding house where she and Thomas had lived for the past 4 years. How was she supposed to pay rent now? How was she supposed to eat? She had exactly $12 to her name and rent was due in a week. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A rider was dismounting in front of the saloon, a tall man in dusty trail clothes with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He moved with an easy confidence as he tied his horse's reins to the hitching post, and something about the set of his shoulders suggested he was accustomed to hard work and harder living. Helena looked away quickly. The last thing she needed was to be caught staring at strange men while wearing widow's weeds. She didn't notice that the stranger watched her walk away, his brown eyes following her progress down the street with an expression of concern. Asher Zimmerman had ridden into Scottsbluff that morning looking for work and a hot meal, in that order. He was 26 years old and had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives, breaking horses, and taking whatever honest work he could find across Wyoming, Colorado, and now Nebraska. He had no ties, no home to speak of, just his horse, his saddle, and a reputation for being reliable with both a rope and his word. He also had a strong sense of what was right and what was wrong, and watching a woman in mourning clothes walk away from the mine office with her head held high despite obvious distress struck something deep in his chest. Inside the saloon, Asher ordered whiskey and struck up a conversation with the bartender, a garrulous man named Pete who was happy to share town gossip with a newcomer. That mine explosion 2 weeks back. Pete shook his head while wiping down the bar. Terrible business. 3 men dead, and Garrison won't pay a cent to the families. Says the widows aren't entitled. The men had 2 boys between them who were still young enough to need their father's support, but Garrison claims only adult male heirs qualify, and even then he's fighting it tooth and nail. Asher sipped his whiskey. That woman who just walked past, the one in black, she one of the widows, Mrs. Harper, Helena. Sweet girl. Her husband Thomas was a good man, always fair in his dealings, worked hard, saved careful. But all those savings went to doctor bills last year when Helena took ill with pneumonia. Thomas spent everything to make sure she got proper care. And now Garrison won't give her a dime of the compensation Thomas paid into for 6 years. Pete's expression was disgusted. It's legal, mind you. The contracts really do say male heirs only, but legal and right aren't always the same thing. No, they're not. Asher set down his glass with a soft click. This Garrison, he in town most days, got an office at the mine and another one attached to his house on the edge of town. Big place, can't miss it. Why? Just curious about the kind of man who'd let a widow starve when her husband died making him money. Asher spent the next 3 days learning everything he could about the Silver Creek mine, Victor Garrison, and the explosion that had killed 3 men. He talked to miners at the saloon, to shopkeepers who extended credit to struggling families, to the minister who had presided over the funerals. The picture that emerged was damning. Garrison had ordered the blasting schedule accelerated to meet a contract deadline for silver ore. The foreman had protested that it wasn't safe, that the charges needed more time to be set properly. But Garrison had threatened to dock his pay if he didn't get the ore shipped on schedule. So the foreman had compromised his professional judgment, the charges had gone off wrong, and a tunnel had collapsed, crushing 3 men beneath tons of rock and earth. The mine had been shut down for 4 days to clear the debris, then reopened as though nothing had happened. Asher also learned that Helena Harper was living on credit and charity, that the boarding house owner had given her 2 weeks' extension on rent out of pity, and that she was looking desperately for work in a town that had few opportunities for respectable women, and even fewer for those in mourning. He saw her again on his 4th day in Scottsbluff, coming out of the general store with a small parcel under her arm. She looked thinner than she should, her face drawn with worry and grief. But she walked with her spine straight and her head up, refusing to be beaten down by circumstances. Asher found himself crossing the street before he'd consciously decided to do so. "Mrs. Harper." "Madam, I wonder if I might have a word." Helena turned, surprise flickering across her face. Up close, Asher could see that her eyes were a remarkable shade of green, even reddened with recent tears. She was lovely in a way that had nothing to do with features, and everything to do with the strength visible in every line of her bearing. "I don't believe we've met, sir." "No, madam. Name's Asher Zimmerman. I'm new in town and I've heard about your situation. About your husband and the mine owner refusing compensation." Helena's expression closed down immediately, pride and pain warring in her face. "I don't need charity, Mr. Zimmerman. Thank you for your concern, but I'll manage my own affairs." "I'm not offering charity, madam. I'm offering help with a fight." Asher kept his voice low and respectful. "Garrison's in the wrong, legal contracts be damned. Your husband paid for insurance. You're entitled to that money. I think I might be able to help you get it." "How?" "I've already spoken to a lawyer. He says the contract is ironclad. Women aren't recognized as legitimate heirs for compensation purposes." The bitterness in her voice cut like a knife. "Contracts can be challenged, precedents can be set, and men like Garrison respond to pressure. I've seen his type before, Mrs. Harper." He's counting on you being too poor, too isolated, and too grief-stricken to fight back. Prove him wrong." Helena studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You have nothing to gain from this." "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I know what it's like to watch powerful men abuse those who can't fight back." Asher's voice was quiet but firm. "My mother was widowed when I was 16. The ranch owner she worked for tried to cheat her out of wages owed. I was young, but I learned fast how to stand up to bullies. Let me stand up to this one with you." Something shifted in Helena's expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but a cautious hope. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Zimmerman?" "First, we document everything. Every payment your husband made into the insurance fund. Every promise Garrison made about safety conditions. Every witness to the negligence that caused the explosion. Then we take it public. Newspapers, town meetings, territorial courts if we have to. And we make enough noise that Garrison finds it easier to pay what he owes than to keep fighting. That could take months. I don't have months, Mr. Zimmerman. I have about 10 days before I'm evicted from my room." Asher made a decision that surprised himself. "I've got money saved. Let me pay your rent until we get this sorted. You can pay me back from the compensation when we win it." "Absolutely not. I won't be indebted to a stranger." "Then don't think of it as debt. Think of it as an investment. I'm betting on you, Mrs. Harper. I'm betting that you're strong enough to see this through and that justice will win out. And if I'm wrong, then I'm out a few dollars, but I'll sleep better knowing I tried." He held out his hand. "Partners?" Helena looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and shook it. Her grip was firm despite the trembling Asher could feel in her fingers. "Partners, Mr. Zimmerman, but I will pay you back every cent." "I know you will, madam. I never doubted it for a second." Over the next 2 weeks, Asher and Helena became a familiar sight in Scottsbluff, working together to build their case against Victor Garrison. Asher's status as an outsider, paradoxically, gave him freedom to ask questions that locals felt too vulnerable to voice. And Helena's position as the wronged widow gave her a moral authority that people responded to. They met most afternoons at a table outside the boarding house, where the landlady, Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese woman who'd come west with her gold prospector husband decades ago, served them tea and quietly encouraged their efforts. Asher found himself looking forward to those meetings more than he wanted to admit. Helena was sharp-minded and detail-oriented, with a head for figures that put his basic arithmetic to shame. She kept copies of all Thomas's payment receipts and employment records. She interviewed the widows of the other 2 miners, carefully documenting their situations. And she wrote letters to the territorial governor's office, to mining safety advocates in Denver, and to newspaper editors across Nebraska and Wyoming. Asher focused on the witnesses. He talked to miners who'd been working the day of the explosion, recording their statements about the rushed blasting schedule and ignored safety protocols. He found the assistant foreman who'd quit in disgust 2 days after the accident and convinced him to give a sworn statement about Garrison's orders. And he started asking pointed questions about the mine's other accidents, discovering a pattern of negligence that went back years. As they worked, something began to shift between them. Asher found himself noticing small things. The way Helena bit her lower lip when concentrating on figures, the quick flash of her rare smile, the graceful movement of her hands as she wrote. The way she refused to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. He also noticed how she sometimes seemed to forget her grief for whole minutes at a time when they were absorbed in their work, only to have it come crashing back with visible force, her eyes going distant and pained. "Tell me about him," Asher said one afternoon when he saw that look cross her face. "About Thomas, if you want to, I mean." Helena was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "He was kind. That's what I remember most. He was just genuinely kind. We met at a church social 5 years ago. I'd only been in town a few months, working as a seamstress. He asked me to dance, and he was so nervous he stepped on my feet 3 times. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but he was so apologetic and so earnest that I couldn't help but laugh. We were married 6 months later. Sounds like he was a good man. The best. He used to bring me wildflowers on his way home from the mine, stupid little bouquets of prairie grass and sage blossoms. He said they reminded him of me because they were tougher than they looked." Her voice cracked slightly. "I miss him so much it feels like I can't breathe sometimes." Asher reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture of pure comfort with no ulterior motive. "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry for your loss, Helena." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She didn't pull her hand away. "Thank you for helping me, Asher. I don't think I could face this alone." "You're not alone, and we're going to win this." The breakthrough came in late August. Asher discovered that Garrison had been skimming from the insurance fund, pocketing a percentage of the miners' contributions for himself. It was fraud, pure and simple, and it gave them leverage they desperately needed. "If we go public with this, he could face criminal charges," Helena said, studying the evidence Asher had obtained from a disgruntled clerk at the mine office. "He'll fight back hard. Let him fight. We've got him cornered." Asher's voice was grim. Time to force his hand. They took their evidence to the town marshal, a weathered man named Bill Morrison who'd been looking for a reason to take Garrison down a peg for years. Morrison studied the documents, his expression growing darker by the minute. "This is solid. Real solid. But Garrison's got connections in the territorial capital. He'll lawyer up fast, and this could drag through courts for years." "What if we offer him a way out?" Helena said suddenly. "What if we tell him we'll keep the fraud quiet if he pays out the compensation claims immediately? All 3 widows' full amounts, no contest." Morrison raised his eyebrows. "That's practically blackmail, Mrs. Harper." "No, Marshal, it's negotiation. Garrison gets to avoid criminal prosecution and public humiliation. We get the money our husbands paid for. Everyone wins." Helena's voice was steady, but Asher could see the steel in her eyes. This woman was magnificent when she was fighting for something that mattered. The marshal looked between them, then slowly nodded. "All right, let's go have a conversation with Mr. Garrison." The confrontation in Garrison's office was tense and bitter. The mine owner blustered, threatened, and tried to bluff his way through. But when faced with the evidence of his embezzlement and the prospect of criminal charges, he folded. Within a week, Helena Harper, Sarah Mitchell, and Ann Williams each received compensation payments of $500, the full amount their husbands had been owed. It was a victory that rippled through Scottsbluff and beyond, setting a precedent that would make it harder for other mine owners to deny widows their due. Helena stood in her boarding house room, looking at the bank draft in her hands, and for the first time in 2 months, she cried tears that weren't entirely about grief. Asher found her there, knocking softly on the doorframe. "Mrs. Chen said you'd want to see this." He held out a newspaper from Cheyenne. "We made the front page. Widows fight forces mine owner to pay. Precedent set for women's rights to compensation." Helena wiped her eyes and took the paper, scanning the article. "We did it. We actually did it. You did it. I just helped." Asher leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "What will you do now?" It was the question Helena had been avoiding. With $500, she could survive for a good while. She could leave Scottsbluff, start over somewhere without the memories. She could stay and rebuild a life here. She had options now, freedom she hadn't possessed in months. But looking at Asher, standing in her doorway with his hat in his hands and something uncertain in his eyes, she realized that none of those options felt right without him in them. The thought terrified her. Thomas had been dead less than 3 months. She was still in mourning. Feeling anything for another man seemed like a betrayal of everything she'd shared with her husband. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I haven't thought that far ahead." Asher nodded slowly. "Well, if you need time to figure it out, I've been offered work at the Morrison Ranch. Bill's brother runs cattle about 10 miles outside town. I'll be around for a while yet." Relief and something warmer flooded through Helena. "That's good. That's really good." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but an acknowledgement of possibility. September cooled into October, and Helena slowly emerged from the deepest part of her mourning. She started taking in sewing work again, rebuilding her seamstress business. She helped Sarah and Ann, the other widows, plan their futures. And she saw Asher every Sunday after church, when he'd ride into town on his day off, and they'd walk together, talking about everything and nothing. They talked about Asher's childhood in Kansas, how his father had died in a farming accident when Asher was young, and his mother had worked herself to exhaustion keeping the family afloat, until she remarried a decent man who treated her stepsons fairly. They talked about Helena's family back in Ohio, how she'd come west looking for adventure and found Thomas instead. They talked about books and horses, about the changing seasons and the future of the Nebraska territory. And slowly, carefully, they talked about what was growing between them. "I feel guilty," Helena admitted one afternoon in mid-October. They were sitting by the North Platte River, watching the water flow past. "Thomas has been gone 4 months, and I find myself thinking about you constantly. What kind of wife does that make me? The human kind." Asher's voice was gentle. "You loved your husband, I know that, but he's gone, Helena, and you're still here. You're allowed to live. You're allowed to feel things. It feels too soon. Then we'll wait. I'm not going anywhere." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious. "I'll wait as long as you need, Helena. A month, a year, 10 years, however long it takes for you to be ready." Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "You barely know me. Why would you wait?" "Because in the time I've known you, I've watched you face down a corrupt mine owner with nothing but courage and determination. I've seen you comfort other grieving widows while dealing with your own pain. I've listened to you talk about your dreams and your fears, and I've learned that you're the strongest, smartest, most incredible woman I've ever met." Asher reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather light. "I'm falling in love with you, Helena. Have been since the day you shook my hand and agreed to fight. So yes, I'll wait, however long it takes." Helena's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. Even Thomas, whom she'd loved, had been more reserved in his expressions of feeling. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. Love usually does, but it's worth being scared for the right person." They didn't kiss that day. Helena wasn't ready. But Asher took her hand and held it as they sat by the river, and that simple contact felt like a promise of everything that could be. November brought the first snows, and with them, complications. Victor Garrison, bitter about his defeat and the money he'd been forced to pay, started spreading rumors about Helena and Asher. Gossip swirled through Scottsbluff about the widow who'd taken up with a drifter, about impropriety and indecent haste. Helena felt the judgment in the way some women turned away from her at church, in the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the general store. It stung, especially from people she'd considered friends. "Let them talk, Mrs. Chen said firmly when Helena returned to the boarding house near tears one afternoon. They don't know your heart. They don't know what you've been through. You live your life for yourself, not for gossiping fools. But the rumors took their toll. Helena found herself pulling back from Asher, canceling their Sunday walks, making excuses when he came to town. She couldn't bear the thought of dragging him down with her, of having his reputation damaged by association with her. Asher, to his credit, didn't push. But Helena could see the hurt in his eyes when she claimed to be too busy to see him, and that hurt was its own special kind of pain. The situation came to a head in late November. Helena was in the general store, purchasing thread, when she overheard two women talking near the fabric bolts. It's shameful, really. Her husband dead barely 6 months and she's already carrying on with that cowboy. Thomas Harper deserves better than to have his memory disrespected like that. Helena's hands clenched on the spool of thread. She wanted to scream at them, to defend herself and Asher. But the words stuck in her throat, choked by months of grief and guilt and confusion. Then a new voice cut through the store, loud and clear. "Excuse me, ladies, but you might want to keep your vicious tongues to yourselves." Sarah Mitchell, one of the other mine widows, stood near the door with her arms crossed and fire in her eyes. "Helena Harper fought for all 3 of us when that bastard Garrison tried to steal what our husbands died for. She stood up when the rest of this town was content to let him get away with murder. And she did it with the help of a good man who wanted nothing more than to see justice done. If that makes her shameful in your eyes, then your eyes need examining." Ann Williams stepped up beside Sarah. "My children have food on the table because Helena refused to back down. So does Sarah's boy. If she wants to find happiness with Mr. Zimmerman, she has my blessing and gratitude both. And if the 2 of you have nothing better to do than tear down a woman who's been through hell, then maybe you should take a hard look at your own lives." The 2 gossiping women fled the store in red-faced embarrassment. Helena stood frozen, overwhelmed by the unexpected defense. Sarah came over and squeezed her arm. "Don't you dare let them make you ashamed of being happy. Thomas was a good man, and he'd want you to live, not spend the rest of your life in mourning." Helena burst into tears right there in the general store, and Sarah and Ann held her while she cried. Not tears of grief this time, but of relief and release and gratitude for friends who understood. That evening, Helena walked out to the Morrison Ranch. It took her an hour and a half, and by the time she arrived, her skirts were muddy and her hands were numb with cold. But she needed to see Asher, needed to tell him everything she'd been holding back. He was in the barn, brushing down a chestnut mare when she found him. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Helena, what are you doing out here? It's freezing. You should have sent word. I would have come to you. I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I've been a coward." The words tumbled out of her in a rush. "I've been letting other people's opinions keep me from what I want, from who I want. I've been so worried about what's proper and what's respectable that I forgot to think about what's right for me. And what's right for me is you, Asher. It's been you since the day you offered to help me fight." Asher set down the brush slowly, his expression unreadable. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I'm done hiding from gossip and judgment. I'm saying that Thomas would want me to be happy, and you make me happy in ways I didn't think were possible anymore." Helena stepped closer, her heart pounding. "I'm saying yes. To whatever you're offering, to whatever we could be together. I'm saying yes." The smile that broke across Asher's face was like sunrise. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm offering everything, Helena. My heart, my future, my name if you'll take it. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "Then kiss me," Helena whispered. "Please, Asher, kiss me." He did, and it was nothing like the gentle, respectful kisses she'd shared with Thomas. This was fierce and passionate and full of desperate longing held too long in check. Helena kissed him back with everything she had, pouring months of grief and fear and hope into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but I don't care. Marry me, Helena." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed in early December, a small ceremony at the church with Sarah Ann Bill Morrison and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Helena wore a simple blue dress instead of white, a choice that raised some eyebrows but felt honest and right. Asher wore his best suit, bought specially for the occasion, and when he looked at her standing at the altar, the love in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The minister kept the ceremony brief and heartfelt. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Asher kissed Helena with such tenderness that Mrs. Chen openly wept. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, in the same room Helena had lived in as Thomas's widow and through all the dark months after. But with Asher beside her, it felt transformed into something new, a place of beginning rather than ending. "Are you sure?" Asher asked as they lay together in the darkness, his hand tracing gentle patterns on her arm. "About all of this, about me. I've never been more sure of anything." Helena turned to face him, her fingers finding his in the dark. "I love Thomas. I'll always love him for the time we had and the man he was. But he's gone and you're here, and what I feel for you doesn't diminish what I felt for him. It's just different. It's ours." "Ours," Asher repeated softly. "I like that." They made love slowly and carefully, learning each other with patience and wonder. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Helena felt something she'd thought lost forever: peace. The winter was hard but manageable. Asher continued working at the Morrison Ranch, and Helena's seamstress business flourished as more women in town, inspired by her fight against Garrison, came to support her. They saved carefully, planning for their future. In the spring, they used a portion of Helena's compensation money and their combined savings to purchase a small piece of land outside Scottsbluff. It wasn't much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it and enough grazing for a modest herd, but it was theirs. Asher built their house with his own hands, with help from Bill Morrison and some of the miners who remembered what he'd done for their widowed friends. Helena planted a garden, put up curtains, and made the simple frame structure into a home. On the day they moved in, Asher carried Helena over the threshold, both of them laughing at the silly tradition. But when he set her down in their front room, with the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, the laughter faded into something more profound. "This is ours," Helena said, the same word Asher had repeated on their wedding night. "All of it, our land, our home, our future." "Our family," Asher added quietly. "If we're blessed that way." They were. Helena discovered she was pregnant in early summer, and the joy that filled her was complicated but real. She would have loved to give Thomas a child, but fate had decided otherwise. This baby would be Asher's, and that felt right in its own way. The pregnancy was easier than her bout with pneumonia had been, though Helena suffered from morning sickness that lasted well past noon most days. Asher fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more than she wanted and limiting her work to light tasks. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Helena protested one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "Women have babies all the time, Asher. I can handle basic chores." "I know you can, but you don't have to because I'm here to help." He took the wet sheet from her hands and hung it on the line himself. "Let me take care of you, Helena. Please." She relented, partly because arguing with him was exhausting and partly because his concern, while excessive, came from a place of deep love. He'd already lost so much in his life. She understood his fear of losing her too. Their son was born in February of 1884, during a snowstorm that nearly prevented the midwife from reaching their homestead. Helena labored for 14 hours, and there were moments when Asher, pacing the front room while listening to her cries, thought he might lose his mind with helplessness and fear. But when Mrs. Chen finally emerged from the bedroom, she was smiling. "You have a healthy boy, Mr. Zimmerman. And your wife is tired but well. Go meet your son." Asher entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Helena lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a quilt she'd sewn herself. "Come see him," Helena whispered. "Come meet our boy." Asher sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peering out from the quilt. The baby had dark hair like his and Helena's nose. He was perfect in a way that made Asher's chest ache. "He's so small," Asher breathed. "How is he so small?" "All babies are small, darling." Helena was smiling despite her exhaustion. "Do you want to hold him?" Asher took his son with extreme care, terrified he might somehow break this fragile new life. But the baby settled in his arms with a little sigh, and something fundamental shifted in Asher's understanding of the world. This was his child, his family, his responsibility and his joy. "What should we name him?" Helena asked. They discussed names for months but had never settled on one they both loved. Now, looking at his son's face, Asher knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said quietly, "if you're comfortable with it. To honor the man who came before me, the man whose life and death brought us together." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that. You'd name our son after my first husband. He was a good man who loved you and made you happy. That deserves to be remembered, and our boy deserves a name with meaning and history." Asher looked up from the baby to meet Helena's gaze. "Unless you'd rather not, I don't want to cause you pain." "It doesn't cause me pain, it causes gratitude." Helena reached out and touched Asher's face with gentle fingers. "You're a remarkable man, Asher Zimmerman. I fall more in love with you every single day." "The feeling's mutual, Mrs. Zimmerman." They named their son Thomas Asher Zimmerman, a bridge between past and present, and he grew into a sturdy, cheerful child who had his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. The years that followed were full of the normal struggles and joys of frontier life. The ranch expanded slowly as Asher built up their herd and Helena's sewing provided steady supplemental income. They faced harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and fluctuating markets. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. In 1886, Helena gave birth to twin daughters, Mary and Grace, who brought chaos and laughter into the household in equal measure. Asher proved to be a patient, affectionate father who could often be found with a baby balanced on each hip while trying to help young Thomas with his letters. The Silver Creek mine eventually closed in 1887, its veins exhausted and its reputation too damaged by scandal to attract good workers. Victor Garrison left town in disgrace, and a new mining operation opened under better management and safer conditions. The widow's compensation case that Helena had won set precedents that rippled across the territory, making it harder for companies to deny women their rights. Sarah Mitchell remarried and moved to Denver. Ann Williams stayed in Scottsbluff and opened a successful bakery. And Helena remained friends with both women, connected by the shared experience of loss and survival and the fight that had brought them justice. On winter evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Helena and Asher would sit together by the fire. Sometimes they talked about their days, about plans for the spring planting or repairs the barn needed. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Asher whittling and Helena mending. And sometimes Helena would think about Thomas Harper, the kind man who'd brought her wildflowers and died too young. The grief had faded to a gentle sadness, no longer sharp but never entirely gone. She'd learned that it was possible to hold love for someone lost while building a full and happy life with someone new. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked one evening, noticing her distant expression. "About how strange life is. How the worst thing that ever happened to me led to one of the best things. I don't mean I'm glad Thomas died," she added quickly. "I would never wish that, but if he hadn't, I would never have met you. Our children wouldn't exist. This life wouldn't be ours. I think about that too sometimes. About how I happened to ride into Scottsbluff on exactly the right day to see you walking away from Garrison's office. What if I'd gone to Cheyenne instead, or stayed in Colorado another season? We might never have met. But we did meet, and you helped me when I had no reason to expect it. You stood beside me and fought for something that didn't benefit you at all." Helena set down her mending and moved to sit beside Asher on the floor in front of the fire. "You gave me my life back, Asher, and then you gave me a whole new life I never expected to have." Asher put down his whittling and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You did the same for me. Before you, I was just drifting. No real purpose, no home, nothing tying me to any place or person. You gave me roots. You made me want to build something permanent. We built it together." "Together," Asher agreed. "That's the only way anything worth having gets built." They sat that way for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, secure in the knowledge of their shared love and the life they'd created from tragedy and courage. In 1890, Nebraska achieved statehood, and the Zimmerman Ranch was part of the celebration. Asher served on the local county council, working to improve roads and establish better schools. Helena continued her seamstress work and became known throughout the region for her beautiful quilts. Young Thomas started school and proved to be a bright student with his mother's facility for numbers. The twins were 4 years old and into absolutely everything, fearless and wild and deeply loved. When Nebraska celebrated statehood, the whole family traveled to Scottsbluff for the festivities. There was a parade down Main Street, speeches by local officials, and a dance at the newly built town hall. Helena wore a green dress she'd made herself, and Asher wore the suit he'd married her in, let out slightly to accommodate the few extra pounds of domestic happiness. They danced together as the sun set, their children playing with other youngsters near the refreshment tables. Bill Morrison, now the county sheriff, raised a glass to them. Mrs. Chen, elderly but still sharp, beamed with grandmotherly pride. And the whole town celebrated not just statehood, but the community they'd built together through hardship and determination. "Happy?" Asher asked as they swayed to the music. "Incredibly," Helena answered honestly. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." As the evening wore on and the stars came out over the Nebraska prairie, Helena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief and loss, the fight for justice, the unexpected love that had bloomed from ashes. It hadn't been easy. There had been dark days and moments of despair. But standing here with Asher's arms around her and their children's laughter ringing in her ears, she knew that every struggle had been worth it. She'd loved and lost, then learned to love again. She'd fought for what was right when it would have been easier to give up. And she'd built a life of meaning and purpose and joy. Thomas Harper would always be part of her story, the first chapter that had ended too soon. But Asher Zimmerman was her present and her future, the man who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her enough to lift her up. Together, they'd created something beautiful from tragedy. A family, a home, a legacy that would outlast them both. As they walked home under the stars that night, children drowsy and leaning against their parents, Helena looked over at Asher and smiled. He smiled back, understanding everything that passed between them without words. This was happiness. This was home. This was the life worth fighting for, worth risking for, worth building day by day with love and faith and stubborn determination. And it was theirs, wholly and completely, earned through courage and sealed with love that would last all their days. The seasons continued to turn, bringing the Zimmerman family through good years and lean ones. In 1893, when drought threatened their cattle and water became scarce, Asher and Helena worked together to dig deeper wells and move the herd to better grazing. The whole family pitched in according to their abilities. Even young Thomas, now 9, took on real responsibilities helping his father with the animals. Helena's garden suffered in the dry heat, but she'd learned from earlier years to preserve and store carefully. Her root cellar kept them fed through the worst months, and when rains finally came in the fall, they celebrated with the relief of those who'd faced hardship and survived. The twins, Mary and Grace, started school in 1894, and Helena found herself with more time for her sewing business. She began taking on custom orders from wealthy families in Scottsbluff, and even some from as far as Cheyenne, developing a reputation for wedding dresses that brought brides from across the region to consult with her. The extra income allowed them to expand the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper workshop where Helena could meet with clients. Asher built her a beautiful oak table for cutting fabric and shelves to hold her growing collection of patterns and materials. "You're spoiling me," Helena protested when she saw the workshop finished. "Impossible. You deserve to be spoiled after everything you've given me." Asher wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Besides, your business is booming. You need proper space to work." She leaned back against him, comfortable in the embrace. "We've come a long way from that day you offered to help me fight Garrison. Best decision I ever made, approaching you on that street." In 1896, Thomas Jr. turned 12 and announced he wanted to learn veterinary medicine. He'd always had a special way with animals, and Doc Harrison, the town's only veterinarian, had agreed to take the boy on as an apprentice in a few years. Helena and Asher encouraged his ambitions, proud of their son's compassion and dedication. The twins were 8 and completely different despite sharing a face. Mary was quiet and studious, always buried in books borrowed from the traveling library. Grace was adventurous and physical, more likely to be found climbing trees or racing her horse than sitting still for lessons. Helena saw pieces of herself in both girls and marveled at how children could be shaped by both nature and nurture in such unpredictable ways. That same year, Scottsbluff finally got telephone lines, though the Zimmerman ranch was too far out to connect. Helena didn't mind. She preferred the slower pace of letters and visits, the deliberate choice to go to town rather than having the world intrude into their home at any moment. The turn of the century brought reflections and reminiscences. On New Year's Eve 1899, Helena and Asher stayed up late talking about the nearly 2 decades they'd spent together. "When I married Thomas, I thought I knew what my life would be. The wife of a miner, probably never wealthy but comfortable enough. Maybe children eventually. A simple, good life." Helena was curled against Asher's side on their bed, his arm around her shoulders. "I never imagined any of this. Being a widow at 24, fighting a mine owner, falling in love again, building a ranch, our children. None of it was in any plan I'd made. Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not a single moment. Well, except maybe the day Grace broke her arm falling out of that cottonwood, that I'd change if I could. Asher laughed quietly. She's too much like you, stubborn and fearless and absolutely certain she can do anything. She gets the stubbornness from you. Fair point. They were quiet for a moment, listening to the wind outside and the distant sounds of their children sleeping in their rooms. Then Helena spoke again, her voice soft. Thank you for loving me, for being patient when I was grieving, for fighting beside me, for giving me this beautiful life. Helena, sweetheart, you don't need to thank me for any of that. Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I've ever done. Asher pressed a kiss to her temple. You saved me just as much as I helped you, maybe more. Then we saved each other. How about that? Sounds about right to me. The new century brought changes to the American West. Scottsbluff grew from a frontier town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. The open range shrank as more homesteaders arrived and fenced their lands. The wild days of cattle drives and lawless mining camps faded into memory and legend. But the Zimmerman Ranch remained constant, a piece of the Old West preserved through hard work and family dedication. Thomas Jr. did indeed apprentice with Doc Harrison, and eventually took over the veterinary practice when the old doctor retired. He married a schoolteacher named Jane and gave Helena and Asher their first grandchildren. Mary became a teacher herself, moving to Lincoln to attend the new state university before returning to Scottsbluff to open a school for girls. Grace shocked everyone by joining a Wild West show at 18, performing trick riding and roping demonstrations across the country, before eventually settling down with a ranch foreman from Wyoming. Through all the changes and growth, Helena and Asher remained the steady center of their family. They aged gracefully together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of laughter and squinting into prairie sun. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Thomas Jr. came with his wife and 4 children. Mary arrived from town with a beautiful cake she'd commissioned from Ann Williams's bakery, which Ann's daughter now ran. Grace traveled from Wyoming with her husband and their twin sons, a fact that made Helena laugh at the apparent hereditary nature of twins in her family. The house was full of noise and love, grandchildren running through rooms where Helena's own children had played decades before. A long table was set up outside under the cottonwood trees, laden with food and flowers. Friends and neighbors came to celebrate, including Bill Morrison, now retired but still sharp, and Mrs. Chen's grandson who ran the boarding house. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Asher stood and raised his glass. His voice was still strong despite his years, his hand steady as he looked at Helena across the table. 30 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I'd ever met. She was grieving, fighting, and refusing to be beaten down by circumstances that would have crushed most people. I fell in love with her strength first, but I stayed in love with her heart, her mind, her stubborn determination to make the world fairer and kinder. He paused, emotion thickening his voice. Helena, you've given me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. You've made every single day better just by being in it. Here's to 30 more years if we're blessed with them. Helena stood, tears streaming down her face, and raised her own glass. To the cowboy who wouldn't let injustice stand. To the man who saw past my grief to the person I could become. To my partner, my love, my heart. Asher, you changed my life the day you offered to help me fight. I would walk through fire for you, and I know you'd do the same for me. Here's to us, and to the family we've built, and to whatever time we have left together. They kissed across the table while their children cheered and their grandchildren made exaggerated gagging noises at the old people being romantic. Helena laughed against Asher's lips, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This moment, this gathering, this love was everything they'd fought for and built together. From tragedy had come triumph. From loss had come finding. From a widow's desperate fight for justice had come a love story that would be told and retold in their family for generations. The years continued, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Helena's health began to fail in 1918, her lungs never quite recovering from that bout of pneumonia decades before. The influenza epidemic that swept the nation that year hit her hard, and though she survived, she was weakened in ways that couldn't be fixed. Asher nursed her with the same devotion he'd shown throughout their marriage. He sat by her bed reading aloud from books she loved, brought her tea and soup, held her hand through difficult nights. And when spring came and she was strong enough to sit outside, he carried her to a chair under the cottonwood trees so she could watch the prairie bloom. "I'm not ready to leave you," Helena said one afternoon, her voice thin but determined. "Then don't. Stay with me as long as you can, love." Asher's voice was rough with suppressed tears. "I've had a good life, Asher. Better than I dared hope for after Thomas died. You gave me that. We gave each other that. Partnership, remember?" Helena smiled, squeezing his hand with what strength she had. "The best partnership I could have imagined." She rallied through the summer, determined to see her newest great-grandchild born in August. Mary's daughter had married young, and the baby, a girl, was named Helena in her honor. When they brought the infant to meet her namesake, Helena held the tiny girl and wept tears of joy. "Another Helena," she whispered. "May she be strong and brave and stubborn enough to change the world." She passed peacefully in her sleep in September of 1918, with Asher beside her holding her hand. She was 60 years old and had lived a full, rich life by any measure. But to Asher, no amount of time would have been enough. The funeral was held at the church in Scottsbluff, the same church where Helena had married both her husbands. The building was packed with people whose lives she'd touched, women who'd learned to fight for their rights from her example, families she'd sewn wedding dresses and christening gowns for, neighbors she'd helped through hard times. Thomas Jr. gave the eulogy, speaking of his mother's strength, her kindness, her refusal to accept injustice. "She taught us that love isn't a finite resource," he said. "That you can honor the past while building the future. That doing right is more important than doing what's easy." My mother was widowed young and could have let that define her forever. Instead, she fought back, fell in love again, and built a life of meaning and purpose. She's my hero, and I know I'm not alone in that. They buried Helena next to Thomas Harper in the Scottsbluff Cemetery, a decision that might have seemed strange to outsiders but made perfect sense to those who knew the story. Both men had loved her, both had shaped her life, and both deserved to be remembered. Asher stood at the graveside with his arm around Thomas Jr.'s shoulders, saying goodbye to the woman who'd been his whole world for 36 years. Asher lived another 8 years, cared for by his children and surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He never remarried. When asked why, he simply said that lightning didn't strike twice, and he'd been blessed enough with the love he'd found. He spent his remaining years writing down the story of Helena's fight against the mine owner, ensuring that her courage and determination wouldn't be forgotten. He also wrote about their life together, the ranch they'd built, the family they'd raised. These journals would be treasured by their descendants, passed down through generations as proof that love could bloom even in the ashes of tragedy. On a warm June day in 1926, exactly 44 years after Thomas Harper died in the Silver Creek mine, Asher Zimmerman passed away in his sleep at the age of 70. He was buried on the other side of Helena, the three of them together in death as they'd been connected in life. The Zimmerman ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Thomas Jr. and eventually to his children. The house Asher built with his own hands stood for another 50 years before being replaced, but parts of it were preserved, including the workshop where Helena had created her beautiful wedding dresses. The story of Helena Harper Zimmerman became local legend, told and retold in Scottsbluff and beyond. The widow who fought a corrupt mine owner and won. The woman who proved that love could be found twice in one lifetime. The mother and grandmother who taught her family that strength and kindness weren't mutually exclusive. In 1982, exactly 100 years after the Silver Creek mine explosion, the town of Scottsbluff erected a memorial to the miners who died and the widows who'd fought for justice. Helena's name was engraved prominently, along with Sarah Mitchell and Ann Williams. Below their names, an inscription read, "They fought for what was right when it would have been easier to surrender. Their courage changed not just their own lives, but the laws that protected all working families." The memorial stood in the center of town, a reminder that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they refused to accept injustice. And that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. Helena and Asher's great-great-grandchildren still lived in Nebraska, still told the story of the widow and the cowboy who'd found each other in the midst of tragedy and built something beautiful together. The tale had become family mythology, passed down with pride and reverence. And on quiet summer evenings, when the prairie wind blew through the cottonwood trees and the sun set over the ranch land that the Zimmermans had worked for generations, it was easy to imagine them there still. Helena with her green eyes and her iron will, Asher with his steady hands and his good heart, building their life together one day, one choice, one act of love at a time. Their story was proof that the Wild West wasn't just about gunfights and outlaws, cattle drives and gold rushes. It was also about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with courage and determination, about widows who refused to be dismissed, about cowboys who stood up for what was right, about love that could bloom in the unlikeliest soil and grow into something that would last for generations. It was, in the end, a story of hope. The hope that justice would prevail, that kindness would be rewarded, that love, no matter how unexpected or complicated, could heal even the deepest wounds and create beauty from ashes. And in a world that often felt dark and uncertain, that kind of hope was worth remembering, worth celebrating, and worth passing down to every generation that followed.